If you've never heard of Tract Optics, it was founded by a few individuals that used to work for Nikon back when Nikon used to make rifle scopes. Because Nikon shut their door down, these few individuals decided, hey, let's start our own company and bring a very high quality, affordable rifle scope to the market. One such way that they talk about making it more affordable is by having no markups on any of their products. They sell directly to you, the consumer, from themselves on their website. And this 4.5 to 30 by 56 first focal plane Japanese made, very nicely equipped optic comes in around $1,700. Now, I'm pretty sure they do offer discounts for military LEOs, first responders, but the regular standard street price on this thing is roughly $1,700. Now, we are going to be looking at some comparisons with the scope against some very similarly spec'd scopes that are about the same price, and we're going to see how they compare against one another. But for right now, let's see if this $1,700 Japanese-made optic is worth it. Now, this is my second Tract scope. The first one that I reviewed was a 4-20 that I was really impressed by a lot of things with it, but optically I felt it fell short. The individual that let me borrow this also let me borrow his 4-20, and I did do a couple of small snippets of video to see if maybe the 4-20 was just an oddball that just didn't work well. But no, it turns out that they're just sort of optically blah. This, though, should be a little bit different just because the magnification range, a little bit larger in some regards, and well, I don't know. Let's just find out. The box itself is actually quite nice. You could see that the foam inside is designed to fit even larger scopes than this, which I don't know how you can get much larger than this, but okay. And it comes with a few things inside that are okay. Sunshade, some tools, some literature, nothing really elaborate or fancy. To the eagle-eyed viewer or the person that watched my 4-20 video, one complaint I had was that the locks on the elevation and windage turret were very easily manipulated, and already just trying to pull the optic out of the box, the lock just immediately disengages. The weight on this thing comes in at a pretty hefty 42 ounces. Now, to put that in retrospect, if this was a Vortex Razor HD Gen 2, that would come in still about 6 ounces heavier than this. Which, yeah, the Razor is probably one of the heaviest scopes I've ever reviewed, and this is not that far behind it. One of the main comparisons we're going to take a look at later is the very similarly priced Delta Stryker HD 4.5 to 30 by 56, and as you can see, it comes in, as near as makes no difference, 7 ounces lighter. Both of these scopes are about the same length, have the exact same features, but there's a massive weight difference between these two. Reticle-wise, control-wise, they're going to have their pros and cons, which we will be looking at soon, but that's going to be this thing's main competitor, because for $1,800, it's basically the same price as this, and it features basically all the same things. Anyway, starting with the fast focus eyepiece, there is a nice rubber grip texture to the outside. I usually don't care for having the fast focus eyepiece be really easy and quick to adjust, but when it does have something like this and feels really nice in hand, I'll let it slide a little bit. There is a little bit of play side to side and up and down on this eyepiece, but it's not to the point where I'm going to feel like it's going to cause a problem. It is, however, buttery smooth to adjust, and the same thing for the magnification ring. 180 degrees is standard throw across the board, and this is what you get from this $1,700 package. At least when these were available, when my friend got it, he did not get a throw lever included. I don't even know if they make a throw lever for it. But this thing is so smooth and easy to turn that you almost don't even need a throw lever on it, because you barely need any finger pressure on it to grab it and turn it. The splines that are on all the touch points on this scope are very nice. They're not so deep and aggressive that they hurt, but they're not so shallow that your fingers just slip off of it. They're a good in between. The illumination knob goes from 1 to 11 with offs in between, but as you can see, the battery compartment is the exact same size diameter as the knob itself. And if you don't lock this up all the way and you go to turn the knob counterclockwise to increase or decrease the illumination, you do have the chance of taking the battery compartment off by accident and causing issues. Another thing I don't like about having this sort of setup is taking the cap on and off can be a real pain because you have such a small area to work with. But once you do take off the cap, you can see we have a standard 2032 battery and a very nice looking battery compartment on the inside. The battery clicks into place quite nicely and the cap threads on with little to no drama. Now, the knob itself actually has an extremely nice feeling and sounding action to it. The detent is nice, sharp, and deep, so when you go to change it from one setting to the next, it pops into place, which is very reassuring. As far as the parallax knob, it goes down to about 25 yards and out to infinity in a 180-degree sweep, and the knob itself is really not that big, especially when you look at the size of the turrets on these things. One issue I did run into with this scope is that as a result of that combination at the higher magnifications, the side parallax is very, very touchy, meaning if you're trying to get the perfect image for your target, you might be fishing around for it a little bit. Now, the biggest complaint I had with the 4-20 was the lock setup for the windage and elevation. The turrets are very large and chunky, and as a result of that, you can get a really good purchase on them. But the locks are so anemic that it'll just work itself loose by itself if you're not careful with this thing. Happily, however, the turrets sound and feel excellent, and they have a really good positive click and very little wiggle despite how large these turrets are and how high they come up to disengage them from the locks. Very impressed by the action, but the locks are not great. And for whatever reason, if you don't put perfect center pressure on it, the turret sort of jams up and doesn't lock. And then when it does lock, you don't know that it's locked by having a nice positive click. It's more of just like a shh, and that's it. It's definitely the weakest part physically of this scope, but that's the only real nitpick. The coloration is great, the finish is great. Everything on this scope looks absolutely fantastic, but let's get behind it and see if the glass is up to snuff. The MRAD ELR, or Extreme Long Range Reticle, found inside the MRAD version of this 4.5 to 30 by 56 is quite nice. At 4.5x, you can see we have a massive amount of drops going well beyond what anyone's going to shoot at any caliber, any distance really. Like a 22 at a mile, you could probably hold for it with this reticle at its minimum. However, increasing it to its maximum, you can see that we already have a darkening to the image. This is kind of sort of similar with what I saw with the Delta Stryker HD. The 4.5 to 30 magnification range is a little odd in my findings. We are, however, in a fairly dark environment, so maybe that'll improve when we go outside to actual daylight hours. To showcase that it's not my camera not being centered properly on the scope itself, I adjust the height, and as you can see, we're as dead center as we can be height-wise and side to side on the width-wise. So this is as close to perfect as I can get it, and that is how much darker the image is. Now, if you're still wondering, well, maybe your eye relief is set wrong, I push it a little bit farther forward. You can see right there, we were getting some bad tunneling and shadows. And if we go back to where we started, it's pretty good. And we go one closer and you can't see through the thing. So this is as perfectly set up as I can get it, which is what I make all of the scopes that I do for testing. I make sure everything is as perfect as I can possibly get it. Illumination on this does fill out the entire drop part of the reticle, which is quite nice. And it does look pretty good here. Again, the illumination knob feels absolutely fantastic. The ELR reticle, I like the very fine center dot, and it's very easy to pick up. All the lines are very easy to read. I actually really like the dots on the drops for the half-mil increments. I think that's a really nice way of breaking up the reticle while not making it look too cluttered. It's really, really nice to get a fast, quick, okay, this is where I roughly have to hold. It's very well set up. And it's perfect for this magnification range. Sound, feel, and visible indication as far as lining up is superb. The lock it just doesn't fill me with confidence. And that's the thing, like it doesn't lock in the up position. So if you're turning this thing and you accidentally put a little bit of downward pressure, it can easily start to fall into the lock and cause a problem. Another key thing to keep in mind is that this is not a tactical style scope. This is a PRS style scope first and foremost. So that's another reason why some of the controls are the way they are. It's also nice to know if your PRS style scope is going to track properly. The reticle lines up to my target flawlessly. As you can see there, everything is perfectly lined up. Adjusting the side parallax yields no significant shift from our point of aim, point of impact, and neither can be said with changing the magnification. Everything remains perfectly on point all the time. Absolutely perfect. Image down here looks very, very impressive and something I'm very happy with. 4 mils over, 4 mils up, and it's basically a perfect performance. The windage resets to 0 flawlessly, as one would hope and expect, and dialing up the elevation to a 10 full mil set, and you can see that we're only slightly off at 10 full mils. In fact, when I backtrack, it's only about a single click or 1% at 10 mils. It is a very good performance. The only way it would be better is if it was exactly 10 mils, but it's not. It's only 1%. But there have been a lot of other scopes that are much more expensive than this that have been at least that much off, if not a little bit more. I also didn't notice any slop to either the elevation or the windage erectors, so whenever you do dial these turrets in, you're going to get out almost exactly what you put in by 1%. But very quickly, going back to the turrets, what a lot of PRS shooters will actually do is machine the inside lock mechanism completely out of the elevation turret. And it makes sense because if you turn the dials really quickly and you put any sort of slight downward pressure, it's going to start engaging the lock. And if it engages the lock and you're on the clock in a match when every 1/10 of a second could be the difference between winning and losing, you don't want to play that game. Why would you? So PRS shooters will remove the lock entirely and just have the elevation turret be ready to dial at all times. And I absolutely understand that and agree with that. However, all Track had to do is add a little bit of a detent on the locked and unlocked position of the elevation and windage turret, and it would alleviate all of those problems. I don't know why they don't do it, but there you go. It's a question for another time. As far as our view here at a 30-yard power transformer at 30x, you could see that the side parallax definitely indeed goes down to that 25-yard or meter minimum. Image here is quite good. No real chromatic aberration that I could see. Sharpness and resolution also seem fine. They don't look bad at all. But that's only at 30 yards. Let's push this thing out a little bit further. I must note that the air was very hazy this day. As you could see, the colors are a little bit more muted. I believe this is when we were having the Canadian wildfires, actually, last summer. I'm like 99.9% sure that's exactly what was going on when I filmed this. So some of the areas that we're going to be looking at today are going to have a bit of haze to them. But it's going to be a great test to see if the glass can compensate for a lot of that. At the minimum magnification on this thing at 4.5x, we're supposed to have 24.7 foot field of view at 100 yards, which for the magnification range, it's all right. It's a little bit less than what we've seen with some other scopes. And again, I'll be rolling that in with side-by-sides very soon. But it's not so much less that it's completely unusable. At 10x, I think we have a very usable and practical image, and the reticle starts to really come into its own around this magnification, meaning you could easily pick up all of the finer details with the reticle for using for holds, whether it's be wind, elevation, or a combination of both. I should also mention before I forget that I did adjust the side parallax to the distance of this brick building. So as we increase the magnification slowly to its maximum here, we will see if the numbers actually line up. And sure as poop, I'm going to be PG for the remainder of my videos, I think. I'm going to try at least Cursing is almost like second nature to me, but I'm trying to be a better influence for my son. And I know some of you have children and you don't appreciate cursing, so out of respect for you and your children, I'm going to try to limit my foul mouth to as minimum as possible. But anyway, from 10x, we're going to stop here at 20x for a little bit and really evaluate the image. And it's flat out really, really nice at 20x. The tree to the far left is about 200 yards. The trees behind the brick building around 700 yards. So a very good depth of field as far as everything being nice, sharp, and clear. Again, we see that bluish gray hue to the air because of the smoke, but we still see a lot of information coming from the image. Increasing it to maximum, you could see that the image does get a little bit soft, so we do have to tweak the side parallax a little bit to try to regain some of the maximum resolution to the glass, and we do achieve a slightly better image. A little touch of chromatic aberration maybe on the vent on top of that brick building, but that's it. As far as the contrast goes, we could see a lot of information on those bricks. Again, the smoke in the air is definitely causing a little bit of havoc there, but despite this not being perfect, crystal clear skies, bright sunny day, this is still a very good image. There's a lot of information here. But the image does appear a little bit darker here at 30x as opposed to where it was at 20x and subsequently 10x. Illumination on full is barely noticeable, but given this thing's overall design and use philosophy, illumination is only going to be needed in much darker environments. Another thing that we have to talk about with this scope is its exit pupil / eyebox. Tract claims that at 30x we have a 1.8 millimeter exit pupil, and the eye relief is about 3.6 to 3.8 inches. It seems a little bit tighter than that. I had a very challenging time getting behind this thing at higher magnifications, and it shows in more ways than one. At 20x, we do see a slight increase in the size of the exit pupil, and we can shift on a little bit easier and still be able to look through it. As far as the stability to the image itself, both the reticle and the image itself are very stable to one another even at 30x. It might be challenging to get behind it, but if you can look through the scope, you can use the scope. Stopping again at 10x to keep this thing sort of consistent with one another. Again, we have a much larger improvement, and this time it's much easier to get behind it. Again, in almost any position or environment. At the absolute maximum, Tract claims that at 4.5x, we have a 12.4 millimeter exit pupil, which is actually on the larger side. But at 30x, it's definitely I'd say on the smaller side, but not by much, maybe about 5 to 10%, especially against some of its main rivals that, again, we'll be looking at fairly soon. 4.5x, we do have a much better, more forgiving performance. And as you can see, it's stable, but not as stable as it is in the higher magnification. But that's fine because it's such a large eyebox at 4.5 that doesn't really matter. So it really starts to play dividends in that regard. Unfortunately, the reticle is a little bit harder to see at 4.5x, especially on a complicated background. To take a more dynamic approach, 4.5x, you could see we do have a lot of room behind this thing to move, which is great. However, that reticle is really hard to see, and the image stability on it does taper off a little bit faster than all the other magnifications that we've looked at so far. At 10x, it's still pretty usable. I would say it's definitely on par with a lot of the other optics in this sort of magnification range. But as we slowly increase the magnification, I feel like it does get a little bit more limited as we go up. Around 20x, you can see we have some parallax shift going on to the image, but at least the reticle and the target seem to continue to be lined up pretty good. Thankfully, this thing has a very stable image, but it's nowhere near as good as the absolute best possible performance. Here at maximum, you could see how challenging it is for me to try to keep the camera steady behind this, and it really does show. Low light environments, low light performance. Already we saw on the reticle overview segment that at the highest magnification, we already lost a lot of light coming through the scope. And that was, it's not a very bright area, but it's better than what we're looking at right now, which could be a real world scenario for you. Illumination on this thing in these environments is absolutely fantastic. There's plenty of adjustment there to find the absolute perfect illumination for you. As we ramp up the magnification, just try to look at the background part of the image. It really tapers off above 20x. Up to 20x, it's pretty solid. Above 20x, it gets really dark really quick. Another thing you have to take note of is the camera has a fixed f-stop or iris size, whereas your eye will constantly change its iris size to let in more or less light. And in darker environments, your iris is going to dilate and it's going to be larger than the minimum exit pupil on this thing. And that's when you get these really weird shadows that creep up in the image, and it's almost impossible for you to look through the scope. Fortunately, up to 20x, it's pretty decent as far as brightness or light transmission, but up here at the higher magnifications, it really falls short. And as I slowly pull back the magnification, you can see how the window over there just gets brighter and brighter until it gets to the point where it's stable all the way back to its minimum magnification at 4.5x. Because this scope is touted as being an extreme long-range scope, I mean, at least the reticle implies that it's designed for extreme long ranges, let's put this thing out to 1,000 yards and see what kind of image we're getting. Again, this was filmed during the wildfires in Canada last year, so there's a blue-gray haze to the air. As far as the image, though, it looks very solid with only the minorest amount of chromatic aberration on some very high contrast areas. Information, though, does seem pretty good. Dialing up 10 mils and then reacquiring our target, we are going to see if the glass has gotten better or worse. Well, it takes me a little while to get this thing situated again. I'll still use my old tripod, and it was nowhere near as rigid as my new one. But coming up 10 mils, and it doesn't look like we've lost anything. In fact, I would even hazard to say that we might have even improved a little bit of the contrast, which is great. That's what you want to see in a scope like this, that you're going to be dialing it out at maximum magnification at very large distances. I do adjust the height of the camera because we did have a little bit of shift to the exit pupil, and it fixes the brightness issues that we had with dialing up 10 mils. It wasn't that much, maybe about a 16th or so of an inch. Again, when you're talking about a 1.8 millimeter exit pupil being perfect, a 16th of an inch goes a very, very long way. But it is going to be something that you're going to notice, especially if you have a very rigid cheek weld setup. But this is only at 10 mils. This turret goes much higher than that. So just for the hell of it, we're going to dial up 10 more mils of elevation for a total of 20 mils of elevation, reacquire our window, and then adjust the height of the camera again, because now it's even more of a dramatic shift to the exit pupil. And you can see a lot of the brightness is fixed, but the image definitely looks softer here at plus 20 mils. I do adjust the side parallax a little bit, however, and a lot of the imperfections can be tuned out. And when I get it to where I think it's as good as it's possibly going to be, it's really not that much worse than what it was at 0 mils of elevation. This is one of the scope's best performances. Very stable image, very usable with dialing for elevation. Moving on to the side-by-side comparisons, and we're going to start out with this thing's probably main competitor in the magnification, price, and Japanese family of scopes, the Stryker HD 4.5 to 30 by 56. Both of these are about $100 apart from one another price-wise. Length-wise, the Stryker is 16 inches, whereas the Toric is 14.4. Weight-wise, we already saw there's about a 7-ish ounce difference between the two, which is pretty substantial. As far as our field of view, they are identical, 24.7 to 3.7. Exit pupil, however, Delta only claims 8.8 millimeters for the Stryker, whereas for the Toric, 12.4 at the minimum. Both of them go, though, to 1.8 for the Toric, 1.9 for the Delta, respectively. Eye relief is also a little bit of a mixed bag. The Toric is 3.6 to 3.8, so fairly stable, but the Delta is 3.2 to 3.8. Now, there are a lot of key differences between these two, touch point wise. And I have to say, I'm not the biggest fan of some things that are going on with the Delta. The turrets might not be ideal with the Toric as far as the lock goes, but the Delta turrets are just odd. They have a little plunger in the middle, and to reset them is a real pain in the butt, and it just looks like something's going to get jammed up in there, or dirt's going to get inside and mess it up, and it's going to fail, and there's going to be a problem with it. It's just not the best. The Stryker does feel really good in hand. The controls are more or less very good. The Toric, though, I think does have the advantage in that regard, where everything just seems to be a little bit more polished. And, you know, it's going to be a little bit more personal for some people. I get it. But I think physicality-wise, I'd probably give it to the Toric. Image-wise, it's kind of a split between these two. Both of them are capable of producing very good-looking images. But reticle, I have to give it to the Toric. The ELR reticle, I think, is one of the better outfitted reticles for this magnification range. Delta tried being a little bit different with the Stryker and put the elevation hold numbers inboard as opposed to outboard, which no one really, I'm not going to say no one really does, but very few people do. But then they put these crosses at the full mill marks, and there's no real deviation between the halfway points on the mills for the drops, and it just gets really confusing really quickly. I love the ELR in the Toric. It's just very simple and easy to understand, and just it works. Glass-wise, performance-wise, on both of these, I do think that they're about on par with one another. And for the price difference, I mean, there's almost no price difference. The weight difference is probably the only other thing I'd really push as far as like, hey, there's a 7-ounce difference here. That's a lot. But beyond that, they're both fairly relatively similar scopes. Just which one's going to excite you more? For me, I'd have to say it's the Tract Toric excites me a little bit more than the Delta Stryker. And by a little bit more, I mean maybe a little bit more than a little bit more. Like a medium amount more. Next up is to showcase just how far Chinese OEM optics have come. The DiscoveryOptics Gen 2 5 to 25 by 56 is another first focal plane scope, but it costs $350. Now, are these two comparable as far as their feature set goes? Not really. Magnification's pretty close, 4.5 to 30, 5 to 25. All right, you know, I could let that slide a little bit. But the DiscoveryOptics doesn't even have any lock and turrets on the elevation or the windage. But if you're buying the Toric to not really use the locks, then what does it really matter? You know, especially when some people are actually just going to machine the locks out to use the Toric. Weight-wise, they're actually very close. The DiscoveryOptics is about 44 ounces, so 3 ounces off what the Toric is. Lengthwise, the Discovery is 16.3 versus 14.4. Field of view-wise is actually pretty similar, despite the fact that the DiscoveryOptics has a half X discrepancy at 5X at the bottom. It's basically the exact same field of view, 24.5 feet. And at the top end, because it's only a 25 versus a 30, you have 4.8 versus 3.7. Exit pupil-wise, again, very similar between these two. Again, because the magnification shift, we have to take that into consideration. But the DiscoveryOptic is 11.2 versus 2.2, and that is in retrospect to the 12.4 to 1.8. So I'd say they're actually much more similar than they are dissimilar. Eye relief is also fairly similar, but you do have a little bit more forgiveness behind the Toric. Now, I'm not saying this is a direct apples-to-apples comparison, but if you think that the Toric performs great optically, it does perform quite good optically, but a lot of things have come a long ways from a lot of different manufacturers and countries of origin. I'm not saying that I'm going to buy only Chinese-made optics from now on. I still think that the Japanese market, the German market, and the US market still have the advantage and the edge, and I'd much rather buy a scope from that country. But if you're on a really tight budget and you're looking at the Toric going, oh, wow, I'd really like that, the DO Gen 2 is a $350 scope that performs better than I think it ought to do for its price point. The reticle on the DO is also quite nice, but again, I have to give it to the ELR and the Toric. I think, I'm going to say it a million times and a million one times now, it's one of the best setup reticles, in my opinion, for this magnification range. At 300 yards, both of these scopes look, frankly, quite good, and I wouldn't hesitate to use either of these at longer ranges. But when push comes to shove, I would go with the Toric. If you're seriously thinking about spending around $1,700, $1,800 on a scope, would you want to downgrade so much so to save $1,300 and go with a Chinese-made optic, which could have questionable reliability and performance? I don't know if I want to deal with that. Let's say you are on a bit of a budget, but you want to still get something that's decent quality and that will make you feel a little more confident in yourself. Look no further than the Match Pro ED from Bushnell. This 5 to 30 by 56 first focal plane 34mm tubed rifle scope is a giant among non-giants. It's really, really good, and at $1,000 less expensive than the Toric, it comes with a very hefty price savings. Lengthwise, between these two, the MPED's about an inch longer, about 9 ounces lighter. Field of view, again, is about the same at the bottom end, but we have an increase of field of view at 30x for the MPED at 4.1 feet versus 3.7. As far as our exit pupil, I couldn't find any information on the MPED, but I can guarantee you it's at least as good as what the Tract is able to produce. And the eye reliefs are about the same at 3.8 inches. View looking through these two scopes, though, however, is vastly different. The MPED is much larger to look through, and it's a lot easier to get behind, in my opinion, and use at all the magnifications. Reticle-wise, I like the reticle in the MPED. I think it's simple. I think it's still pretty easy to read, but I am going to give it to the ELR and the Toric. I think the reticle on that is still one of the best, but the MPED is not that far behind. The MPED offers all the exact same features as the Toric, much less expensive, still made in China, but a very solid performing optic all in all. I really want to get my hands on another one, but I just have way too much money out there in scopes that I have to sell first. But I will absolutely be owning an MPED at one point in my life, even if it's just to compare against other scopes of this style of magnification range. If you're on a medium-sized budget, I'll say, under $1,000, the MPED is absolutely something that you should be taking very seriously into consideration. And go watch my full review on that as to understand why. Which one would I pick between these two? I like the controls more on the MPED, I believe, as an overall package, especially for the price savings. But I'd probably give the edge optically to the Toric, despite its minor deficiencies. But the Toric tracks so good, and it's very reassuring every time you make an adjustment that it's going to be fine. But the lock is still something that, it's one of those inputs. It's like having a really nice car, but the steering wheel is really uncomfortable. It's like, it really takes a lot of the fun out. Our next big competitor is going to be, again, with the Meopta Optica 6. This is a 5 to 30 by 56, just like what we saw with the MPED, so as near as makes a difference, about the same magnification range. Unlike the MPED, the Optica 6 has a much smaller view looking through it, and as a result of that, a little bit less on the field of view, but it's actually exactly the same now as the Toric, so this will be a much better comparison. As far as what the Optica costs, they're around $1,000, and kind of sort of similar with how how Tract has the Toric, and the turrets kind of could be improved. The Optica could also be improved. Meopta, if you're listening, which I really wish you would, just put a locking or a capped windage turret on the 5 to 30 Optica 6, please, so I could buy one. Because if you did, it would be insanely nice to own. Despite the fact that the view looking through the Optica is even smaller than what it is on the Toric, I think optically the Optica has it beat by a little bit. Despite the fact that it's $700 less expensive than the Tract, the Meopta is just wonderful. The MRAD reticle found in that is kind of similar to what we see with the ELR in the Toric, but I'm used to how the optic is because the MRAD 1 reticle that's found in the 3-18 Optic 6, I'm very conditioned to using, and it's basically that minus the donut around the center. Optically, the Toric is very good, but the Optica is a little bit sharper, a little bit cleaner, a little bit neater. I think it's much more consistent to get behind. As far as some of the main differences between this, weight-wise, the Optica is going to be about 5 ounces lighter. The exit pupil is supposed to be a little bit smaller at the minimum magnification, but on the top end, it's only 0.1 of a millimeter difference at 30x, so basically nothing. And the eye relief is as near as makes no difference the same. Now, Meoptas are partly made in the US, partly made in Europe. They use shot glass, and there's not a whole lot of like massive information on that versus the Tract, which is, Japanese made. If you're on a bit of a budget, again, but you still want a really high quality scope that's not made in China, the Optica 6 is absolutely something you should consider. Despite the fact the view through it is smaller, the resolution on the image is much, much better. And we've seen that with a couple of scopes throughout the years. Most notably would be like the Attacker 4-16 by 42. That thing is very similarly spec'd out to the Optica 6 series, or at least the ones that I've got my eyes behind. Between these two, I'd probably go Optica despite its deficiencies. We cannot talk about high-quality, Japanese-made, high-powered variable optics without including a Vortex product. And if we're going to do it, let's include probably the Mac Daddy of them all, the Razor HD Gen 2 4.5 to 27 by 56. This 48-ounce optic has gone up substantially in price to around $2,500 now, which is about what they were when they first came out. But then COVID screwed everything up, and then Vortex was like, well, we have to inflate the prices of our scopes to continue making our bottom dollars. And when the economy got a little bit better, they were like, people are still paying this money, so we might as well keep the prices the same. That's the only real gripe I have against Vortex right now with some of their higher end stuff. The prices have just gone through the roof. And as good as their products are, that's Night Force money. That's a lot. That's a lot of money. But you could still find them used for about the same price as the Toric, which is the only reason why I'm going to compare these two. Lengthwise, they're exactly the same. Weight-wise, the Razor is 7 ounces heavier at 48 ounces. Field of view-wise, obviously the Razor is going to win. They're notoriously well known for their massive fields of view. 25.3 to 24.7 at the minimum, and the maximum 4.4 to 3.7. Granted, there is a 3x difference. Exit pupil, 12.4 to 2.07 for the Razor, 12.4 to 1.8 for the Toric. However, the Razor reacts and acts like it's much more forgiving than what the numbers will suggest. And the eye relief is, as near as makes no difference, the exact same. But there's another key difference. The Razor is more of a tactical style scope. It has locks on the illumination control, for Christ's sakes. And the locks on the turrets are wonderfully tight and audible. Whereas the Toric, I feel, it's not even what I feel, it's how it's set up. The Tract Toric is an ELR scope. It's a PRS style scope. But yet it still has the locks that really should either be removed completely or revamped completely. One or the other. Tract, please do something, because that's the only thing that's really holding this scope back from being flawless, in my opinion. And nothing could really be... can anything really be flawless? It can, but it's really got to be good. Between these two... if I really wanted to build more of a tactical build, the Razor. If I wanted to go a little bit longer range, maybe the Toric. but I'm probably going to go with the Razor. It's just a little bit better of a package, and optically, I think it's still one of the hardest scopes to beat. What more can I really say about this scope? The only issues that I've had with it are the very touchy side focus, the darkening to the image above 20x at night and above 25 during the day or so, and the locks on the windage and elevation. The windage should be much harder than what it is, or capped entirely, especially given the amazing reticle that they gave us. And the elevation, again, should either be unlocking or just with a much better detented lock. Maybe offer both setups for people tracked. I mean, wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice if we... Yeah, it would be really nice, actually. But those are the only nitpicks that I really have, or at least the things that I could say are negatives. Optically, all things considered, this thing is still very good. For the price point, I think it's a very solid option. The reticle, probably one of my favorites, period. Controls, touch points, materials, finish, the color, wonderful. All the inputs on this thing are wonderful. But just know what their limitations are. The side parallax is very touchy. The magnification is very easy to turn. So if you like to leave it somewhere and hope that it doesn't get bunched around or moved around, then you might wish it was a little more stiff to turn. And the turrets are really the only other thing that I can gripe on. But that's really it. The tracking performance on this thing is stellar. The reticle is stellar. The optical performance is good to very good, maybe even towards great. But I would still love to see some minor improvements. I do think that for the price, it's very competitive. I like the fact that Tract is one of these companies that sells everything direct by themselves. So this way, you don't have to worry about looking at 45 different websites and going, which one has the best price or who can give me the best deal. One website and that's it. Now, some might say that's a monopoly and you'll never be able to get it truly at cost if someone was trying to blow them out or sell them really quickly. But that also means that you don't get price gouging from one company versus the next, or you don't have competition between companies that drive the price up. The price is the price and that's it. And I appreciate and respect that because it's very straight and to the point. This is a much better package than the 4-20. The 4-20 optically wasn't as good as I feel this is, and the controls being as finicky as they are on the 4-20 make me more upset because the 4-20 is like an amazing magnification range for a tactical, like intermediate rifle. I love 4-20 magnification ranges. I love 4-16s as well. But the 4-20 could be just a little bit more improved than this. I think this is a little bit better package from Tract themselves. This scope actually made me very excited to try more of their products out. The 4-20, a little let down on both of them that I've gotten my hands on. I probably will do a small side-by-side video with the 4-20 in the future, but it's one of those things where it's just like, yeah, it's a little bit too disappointing. I am, however, very excited to try out their 2.5-15. I think that would be a really high potentially good scope, and maybe I'll have to buy one of them and give it a real solid critique, knowing that I spent actual money on it, as opposed to letting people that I know send these in for me to test and play with. Overall, though, it's nothing. It's more positive than negative with the scope. And again, the negatives that I touch on might not be a negative for you. If you can get one of these used for less than $1,700, I think it's a home run. If you can get it with a discount through Tract, I think it's a home run. And if you want something that goes up to this magnification range that has the touch points, the controls, the fact that it's made in Japan for this price point, and it's brand new as opposed to a used Razor HD for probably about the same price, that's going to weigh even more. But I think they're two different class of scopes. But with all that being said, I think this is a pretty good option and something that I was more excited to use and play with than I thought I would. And that's pretty high praise, if I may say so myself. Anyway, with all that being said, a huge thank you to my friend for letting me borrow this when he did. I still have one of his scopes here that I plan on using for testing, and it's been like a year and a half. But he is currently training for a really awesome position, so best of luck to him. And best of luck for all of you out there trying to decide on what scope is going to be best for you. I know there's a massive amount of options out there, and the only piece of advice I can give is try to stick with the one that's going to give you all the things that you are looking for. And try not to compromise on any of those. Because even if something isn't, let's say, the highest quality overall, if it fits all of your bills as far as feature sets and what you're looking for, like magnification range-wise, you're going to be much more satisfied with that scope than compromising elsewhere. With that all being said, thank you all very much for watching. And as always, I'll see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.